From meeting room wisdom to bestseller lists, changemakers to chapter ones, this is where expertise meets legacy. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Welcome, everybody. Have you ever dreamed of turning your outdoor adventures and expertise into a successful writing career? Randi Minetor did, and she is with us today here on our podcast. She has transformed her encyclopedic knowledge of America's national parks and passion for birding into nearly 100 published books, including 7 gripping books about deaths in national parks and comprehensive birding guides that have opened doors to speaking engagements and podcast appearances and leadership roles in the birding community. And I mean, not to mention, she's just traveled so many national parks, and we're excited to learn all about them. In the meantime, though, I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. And whether you're an outdoor enthusiast or a subject matter completely ready to just share on your book, her knowledge today is going to give us a great example of how you can apply it to your own lives too. So, without further ado, welcome, Randi.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's really exciting to be here.
Very excited to meet you too. To all of our listeners right now, I was just telling Randi how, I spent hours just looking through all of her stuff and all of her different, books and guides. I mean, somebody who's able to take her passion for something like the outdoors and turn it into a successful career, especially coming from a background of just sort of like, indoor, kind of work. I mean, you really were able to take your dream and turn it into something that you're happy doing. And I mean, I'm sure you can say you probably haven't worked a day in your life in a long time now, right? I mean, being that it's your passion now.
Well, I gotta say that, there are days when I'm sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours that it still feels like work, but nothing like the days when I was with an ad agency and, writing news releases about machines that went ping. This was definitely a huge difference in the way that my life went. And it was, I'm just glad that the chances I took actually worked out over time.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we get into anything else, what made you take that shift? I'm sure you've shared it with so many people already, but share it with our listeners. What made you go from the ad agency to national parks? Was there a moment that defined?
Well, back in the 90s, we used to talk about the golden handcuffs, that you'd get a job that was paying you a lot of money and had great benefits, and whether you liked it or not, you felt like you had to stay there. Well, I got to a day where I realized that I was not doing one thing I had intended to do with my life. I was vice president of the agency. I was making terrific money, but getting up every morning just made me sad. And I thought, what happened? What happened to my dreams of becoming an author and journalist and, all of those things? And I just, held my nose and leapt, essentially. Mm-hmm. And luckily, my husband was a freelance contractor already. He's a lighting designer for theater and film. And he understood what I was going to do. And he also knew that I had the drive to make anything happen that needed to happen for myself. So I made the leap, and it took some doing, but within a year, I was already matching my old income.
Wow.
And most of it's still in public relations, but I started working on books, and my first book came out 4 years later.
Okay, so that's incredible. So were you writing before any of this? Did you just start dabbling sort of as you made this transition, or how long was that kind of brewing in your brain?
Well, that first book, I already had in my head and had actually started doing the research for. That was not an outdoor book. That was a book about women who make more money than their husbands, which back then in the late 90s was unheard of and a very closely held secret. And I was one of them. So I started working on this. I interviewed 120 people. I, wrote this fairly controversial book, and I used all of my public relations know-how to get it in front of the media. And in all honesty, did not do as well as I had hoped. partially because one of the things that happens often not often, I hope, but in the publishing world is that the distributor went out of business. I mean, I had a legitimate publisher. I sold it. I was paid for it, but their distributor went belly up. And to this day, we still don't know how many copies were sold. So, so that,
You don't know how many copies were sold.
nope, they weren't keeping
Wow.
records. It's part of why they went under. And yeah, they didn't return books, so we couldn't guess. It was a very difficult time, but this is something that unfortunately sometimes happens to authors, that a publisher goes out of business, or a distributor, or some other arm of the publishing process, and you're just left holding the bag. So that book, I'll never know if it, considering that I was on the Today Show and, court TV and all kinds of things with it, you'd think that it probably did pretty well, but I'll never know.
Yeah, I
And
mean, for all
that's
you know, it could actually be like the most highest selling book out there ever. But, without that record, how do you know? Maybe you sold more than J.K. Rowling. Who knows?
Who knows? Very unlikely,
That's crazy. Yeah.
but yeah. So from there, I moved on. I decided I didn't want to write another sociological treatise. That wasn't as much fun as I had hoped. So I moved on from that. In the interim, my husband Nick and I had started this quest to see all of the national park properties in our lifetimes, which at the time was just 388 parks. As of today, it's 432. President
Hmm.
Biden added one just this morning. So, the goalpost keeps getting moved, but we've been to 359 national parks at this point. So we're pretty excited about that. And I had
So,
to, to fund that, I had to turn it into a career. So I started looking at becoming a travel writer.
yeah, I mean, as somebody who has also, traveled all over while doing writing, I kind of went outside the United States, but I know what it's like to, just take your backpack, take your laptops. What was that experience like for you? Was it laptops at the time, or
Yes.
what was your process like? I'm just so curious.
Yeah, I'm happy to say it was definitely with a laptop. It
Okay.
was also, this was before smartphones where you could, quickly take notes, right in front of yourself. I was still carrying a little notebook and a pen. So we would go to, some of the books I was working on were actually pocket guides to national parks. And this was with Falcon Guides, which is an imprint now of Roman and Littlefield. And it was a remarkable process. I mean, everything they were doing back then had to be done very fast. So I would get 8 weeks to produce a book. It was nuts. So we
Yeah,
would,
8 weeks is not a lot, especially when you don't have the tools that we do now to
right.
streamline it. That must have been a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it was,
Um,
absolutely. But the happy thing was that they not only hired me, but hired my husband to do the photography for my books. So we were able to travel together, which made this just, tremendous fun. But, still, people would say to me, "Oh, so you go on vacation and you write about it." No, that is not what you do.
I'm
You're
sure that's a
visiting.
lot of people do also do that, but you took it a
Oh,
step
sure.
farther. You're contributing to a specific field,
Right,
in birding,
exactly.
yeah.
And, these were books that had all of the local hotels and restaurants and, all of these things. And while we weren't actually reviewing any of those, we had to make recommendations. So if it wasn't good, it didn't go in the book. But,
Mm.
that meant we had to eat out every night, that I couldn't be doing what we do now with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We had to eat in restaurants. We had to visit, 2 dozen hotels in the space of a week. So these kinds of things are, they're labor intensive, they're time consuming. And
Yeah.
you see a lot of great things and you see a lot of and eat a lot of not so great things. So, that on top of the process of getting to know a national park I hadn't been to before, it was very intense early on and very exciting. And, there were times I would just stand in the middle of the Virgin River in Zion National Park and yell, "This is my job."
Oh,
It was
wait, you
just,
said
it was just
times, like
right.
not just one time you did that. It's a
Yes,
regular
many
occurrence.
times. Yes.
That's
That's the thing that,
funny.
yeah, that it was just joyous. It was wonderful work. So, everything that I had hoped would happen did. But I also learned a lot of things about the publishing industry, and, we could talk about that as well.
That's funny. You kind of, yeah, and we can also talk about that. But I mean,
Yeah,
no, I mean, I get it. It's very, very interesting to hear like how you were able to. You were basically in hotels, you said, so it wasn't RVs. You're just kind of in the car, just back and forth. Lots of road tripping then.
right, exactly.
Mm,
We do most of this by car. I sat down once, actually fairly recently, and figured out the cost of either of staying in a whole bunch, driving in a regular car and staying in a whole bunch of hotels, or getting an RV and doing this that way. And RVs generally get about 8 miles to the gallon. So in the end, it was actually more expensive to use the
right.
RV, especially now that a lot of campgrounds are raising their rates because it's more expensive for you to plug into their water and their electricity and their Wi-Fi, and sometimes even cable that people plug into. So it's gotten more expensive to go RVing than it
Yeah.
really is to load up our Subaru Forester and head down and stay in cheap hotels.
Understood. Our podcast is all about writing, and to all of our listeners right there, they're probably wondering, like, why are we talking about RVs and stuff? But the reason I asked that is because that's what really shows, like, the authentic experience that it took for you to write these books. You know what I mean? Because a
Right,
lot of books, truth of the matter is, it happens when somebody's right here at a computer in their basement or something. But, like,
right.
you were able to do it all different hotels, all over the place. I mean, I think that's really inspiring. And I'm sure that, like, stepping out of that hotel or looking out that window at a different national park all the time probably helped with inspiration a little bit,
It
I would assume.
absolutely did. Yeah. And that's the thing that, some of these places going to, Big Bend National Park or Zion and Bryce Canyon, or, some of the true jewels of the American National Park System, made all of the effort and the long period before the books would actually come out and I'd be able to start promoting them. It made all of that worthwhile. We had these wonderful experiences that we wanted to have anyway. So, and we got to do it together. So, what could be bad?
Yeah, I mean, especially having that partnership too with your husband, Nick, right? Is his name?
Yes, Nick.
Yeah, yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, when you're able to really partner with somebody and make it a collaborative thing, you're not only like building a relationship, but making the work that you're working on stronger just by nature too. So I think that's
Right.
perfect. Something that our listeners can, resonate with too. I mean, I know a lot of people who, for example, they go about their daily lives with their own job and then they come home to their husband and they're like, okay, how was your day? Good, good. Like two completely different careers, but it's great when you can mesh it and work together on it like that. Like that's just, something really special, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I didn't mention about the agency life was I spent 7 years in a basement office without a window. So,
Yeah.
after
Big
that,
difference. Yeah.
yes, getting up in the morning and opening the curtains and seeing the Grand Canyon,
Big difference. Big change.
definitely beats the basement office. So,
Yeah,
good
I
thing.
think the message we can pull from this for our listeners today about writing is like, I guess you just never know where it can take you. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, writing is an industry that, whatever the topic is, you can really dive into it and expand your reach in many ways. A lot of our listeners are business people who,
Mhm.
they own a successful company, they're doing great, but they have these ideas that need to get onto paper in order to scale their business more, get marketing opportunities, speaking gigs. But, a whole other side of that is you were able to travel all over the place. You know what I mean? Like you
Right.
got out of that office in the bottom with no windows and now you're looking at the Grand Canyon. So, I mean, that's just a big piece of advice I think that we're going to end up giving our listeners today is that
Right. There
um,
there are a lot of benefits, and if it's not just about how much money you're going to make, I mean, that old thing, do what you love, the money will follow. It will. It absolutely will, especially if you're happy and you're good at it. But understanding that there are other benefits besides how big a house you're going to buy. That's really the key to making this work for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I'm sure there's also an extent for just like the impact that you're able to make too, because your subject matter is something that, is going to resonate with many different people who need that information. I mean, for example, your latest book, was it The Complete Language of Birds was the most recent, or was it Death and Dying was the most recent? I'm sorry, I'm not sure the years.
Yep, this is the most recent book, The Complete Language of
Okay,
Birds.
that
This
was
came
over
out in
the summertime,
September.
right? September?
Yep. Hmm.
Oh, wait, you just hold it up. Hold it up again. I didn't see
Oh, okay, sure.
it. For all of our listeners right now, there is the book, and oh wow, what a beautiful cover. Is that
Oh,
is
thank
that
you.
kind of 3D right there when you touch it? It
Um,
looks like it's 3D.
yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, I
Embossed.
mean the heron is coming down over the front there. Yeah, this is an Audubon
Mm.
illustration, so that's it was wonderful to be able to use those as part of this.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, beautiful cover. I mean, you can't judge a book by its cover, but it definitely catches the eye. So yeah, I mean, where I was going with that is, it's a book that gives information and facts that people just wouldn't know otherwise. So you're able to actually make a difference. That's
Right.
something that resonates with me all the time. I used to do waitressing, and this is just everything I work on, every person I talk to, I'm able to really just, find meaning in it. So I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely. If I can enhance people's appreciation of the birds around them, that's a big part of what I want to do with my life now. That's also, improve access to birds and birding and identification and helping people to embrace that enthusiasm they feel. That first time you see a bird you've never seen before, something clicks. And, people get hooked very fast. That's what happened during the pandemic. In fact, that a lot of people sitting at home suddenly looked out their windows and said, "Holy cow, what's this thing? And what's this
Mm.
funny little bird with the top knot and the black eyes and the little bit of rust color here? What is that beautiful thing?" Well, that's a tufted titmouse. And suddenly you're seeing something you've never seen before. If I can continue to enhance that understanding and identification and the appreciation we have for birds, it helps us to preserve birds as a genus, as a part of the animal kingdom.
Yeah, and I mean, right in your introduction to that book, you actually have a quote, and it goes something like, even before we developed a way to record our ideas, birds helped us make sense of the world. I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying, because, we're studying ourselves through them in a way. Is that kind of what you meant by that when you wrote that piece of the introduction?
Exactly. I mean, this was back when they still called science philosophy. There was a whole different way of approaching science at that point. And, it was just the beginnings of our understanding of the natural world. And people spent a lot of time trying to fit what they saw into what they understood about the world at that point, which means you get kind of crazy theories like Aristotle's theory that geese turned into barnacles on the sides of ships for the winter, and that they somehow what reverse imploded, kind of sank into themselves and became these little barnacles, and that's how they made it through the winter. The whole concept of migration didn't occur to anybody, honestly, until the 1700s. I mean, it was not until ships could sail all the way down to Africa and realize they were seeing the birds that had been, that now it was summer and they were seeing the birds. They were down there for the winter. They were seeing the birds they saw in summer. Now they understood that the birds flew south. What a concept. And that didn't happen until the late 1700s.
It's
So
always mind-boggling to me to think about what people assumed without the right science. I mean, you're part of the solution too. I mean, people know a lot more now, but there's so many people who don't know information, like small things like that, that
right.
I'm like, barnacles, really?
Right, right.
Yeah.
All sorts of crazy stories like that. And then, Greek mythology and really all of the mythologies had gods and goddesses that identified with birds and had birds as their familiars and, worked that into their understanding of the world. The thing is, birds could fly lots of other things can't fly, including us. So, making that part of, well, if birds can fly, they must be able to fly to the spirit world and talk to the spirits about what they see here, and maybe that's part of how things happen to us here on Earth. There are lots of things like that, trying to figure it out. And then eventually science kicked in, and people started to understand things on a much more tangible, I guess, level. So being
Yeah.
able to tell those stories, it has been a lot of fun.
Was it challenging to kind of balance that mythology along with the more scientific classification of birds? That was something I noticed when I was flipping through, is you were able to kind of do both at the same time. I guess in a way, when you think about it, they do go hand in hand, being that was kind of, science as perceived back then. How do you balance that?
Well,
What was your process?
it was tricky. This was required by the publisher. It's my first book with them, but this was the 13th book in a series they had been publishing now for a couple of years. So they had this requirement of talking about possible powers that, it was flowers and herbs and things like that up until now. So this was the first living, moving creature, that animal that they put into this series. So, having to balance that thing of, saying that birds have powers, not something I actually believe, but traditionally birds have been attributed powers. There is a thing that's very popular even now, that if you see a cardinal in your backyard, it's really somebody
Yeah,
from,
I've heard that one. Yeah.
a deceased loved one coming to send you a message, let you know that they still love you. That's lovely. I wouldn't dispute that, but there are there's also a lot of science about cardinals, the fact that they're monogamous and they mate for life, and you're always going to see them in pairs. Those are lovely things also, that conceivably be a spiritual message, but also a scientific fact.
Right, understood. So I can see how you can do that then, because, a lot of it is, a fact that goes hand in hand with an idea. So it's a matter of distinguishing them, but also kind of knowing which classifies as which and how it benefits the reader's knowledge as a whole as well, and gets a good understanding of it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's always interesting to think about how knowledge has developed over the years and centuries. I
Yes.
mean, my mind is still stuck on the whole barnacle thing. So I'm like, it's funny how like that's still though like we went from that sort of belief, it developed into something more and more and more, to now we know it down to like the scientific like makeup of the birds, like bones and DNA and all of that. You know what I mean? So it
Right.
goes from like theories to just straight hard up facts too. And you were able to find all that research, actually put it into a book.
Yes.
Now I ask you, were you interested in birding before you got this assignment, or
Oh, yeah.
yeah, okay, you're in
Yeah.
the
Way, way back in the early days of my career, I worked in a theater for a while, and as a public relations person. That's where I met Nick, and, where we got together. And when I left the theater for the private sector, for the agency, all of a sudden I had evenings and weekends free, honestly, for the first time in my life. And I was really at loose ends. And Nick said to me, maybe you'd like bird watching. And we got a little bird feeder that we put, one of those little suction cup feeders we put on the outside of our apartment window. And the first thing that showed up were house finches. And house finches are little pink birds. They got pink faces and
pink.
pink rump.
Okay.
Yeah, they're otherwise they look like sparrows. They're, brown, but this frosting of pink over them. And I got nuts, oh my God, what is this? Something I'd never seen before. And, it was very exciting, and I got hooked instantly. So that was back in the mid 1980s. And since then, it took a long time. It takes a long time to build up credibility in the birding world to the point where you can actually write a book and have anybody want to look at it at all. So it took quite some time. I write for Birding Magazine, and I'm a contributing editor with North American Birds Magazine, and some other things. So when I finally just talked my publisher into trying a field guide to New England, I had a little bit of cred, which was nice. But since then, we've been able to do, Birding New England, Birding Florida, Birding Texas, and then this new series, the Best Easy Bird Guides to some of the national parks, in particular Acadia and Cape Cod. So now I'm able to expand that, and the complete language of birds was the perfect thing to kind of build on the basics of, field knowledge and take your understanding of birds another step.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you were able to, not only is it a passion you have now, the writing and traveling, but now you love birding and you get to write a whole book about it and do the research and find out more. I mean, I'm sure that as you went about it, you learned even more than you thought you knew, too. I mean, just by
Yeah.
nature of researching a specific species and finding out fact. What was shocking to you in your research? Anything that you didn't think you'd come across?
Oh boy. Well, in the bird research in particular, there are cultures in which capturing and eating songbirds, little teeny songbirds,
I've heard of
is a
that.
thing, is a delicacy, which I just find horrifying. You got these tiny birds and they put them in cages and they fatten them up and then they drown them in brandy. It's just horrible. But this is a thing. And the interesting thing in particular is that in Europe, when they go to eat this little bird, this ortolan,
Mm.
they throw a napkin over their heads.
So I
So
don't
you
have to look
don't
at it.
see, yeah, so you don't see them do this. And which to me is like, you should be ashamed of yourself for this. So yeah, there were things like that. Ways
I
that
mean, it must
people,
taste really good, I guess, if
God,
that's.
it must. I don't know. I mean, granted, I eat lobster, that's also kind of barbaric if you think about it. So
Yeah, but birds are cuter, so
yes, that
so I
is
see the
true.
difference, I guess.
That is true. Little feathery things. So, yeah.
Yeah, my goodness. But that's crazy. I mean, again, it's amazing, when you dive into a book, really get into it, you're able to learn more and more than you ever thought you would. To all of our listeners, there's another fact to take home with you today. I mean, another reason just to start writing because you'll come across these facts and knowledge that you never knew were even out there. You don't know what you don't know. So.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So you have a whole bunch of books out there, besides the birding. I was looking through your other book a little bit, The Deaths in Zion as well, which a completely different story, I would
Yeah.
say. I mean, birds,
Yeah.
happy, free, flying around, death. What was it like to kind of get into that mindset and like research unfortunate things that happen like that in such a beautiful place like a national park? What was that like?
Well, it's interesting. There was one book out in this series already called Death in Yellowstone that was written by the amazing Lee Whittlesey some 15 years ago, I think. And my publisher suddenly decided with the onset of the National Park Centennial in 2016 that, gee, maybe we could do more of these books. And my agent walked me up to that editor and said, she's going to write these for you. And I've done 7 so far, and we're talking about an 8th now. So Zion in particular, for such a beautiful place to be so treacherous is, kind of hard to digest. The same thing with Glacier. The first one I did was Death in Glacier National Park, where there is a very famous bear attack. It happened August 13th, 1967, what they call the Night of the Grizzlies, where 2 different grizzly bears in 2 different places, 20 miles apart in the park, both attacked young girls and killed them and ate them at just about the same time. It's just a coincidence. They tried to relate this to everything from lightning to menstruation. I mean, they desperately tried to find a reason for this. There's nothing. This is just coincidence. But it was horrible. And, to think that in some place as stunningly beautiful as Glacier National Park, a thing like this could happen. That's hard to take. But in truth, at that point, when I started this book, there were 264 people who had died in the park since it became a park back in the 1910s. So there was a lot of material. And I had to learn how to research that. I'm not an investigative journalist, or at least I wasn't then. So finding the information about these things, especially with the fact that none of the parks that I've written about, with the exception of Acadia, want to help me with this.
They
They
don't want to
don't.
help you. Oh, we know why, because it looks bad on them, doesn't
Right,
it?
right,
Mm.
exactly. They don't want to emphasize this aspect of their parks. That being said, no sooner do they get the finished book in their hands, they want to put it in their stores.
Yeah, well, you
Yeah,
were able to frame it in a way that would be marketable to them by warning about safety measures,
right,
right? I mean, that's how
exactly.
I kind of gathered when I was flipping through. You would tell a story, and then you would say, like, well, this is why you don't go out during a flash flood.
Right.
Um, Interesting.
Exactly. Exactly. This is why you have to have all the information about your planned hike or outing or whatever you're going to do in the park before you go, because bad things can happen to you. And Zion, in particular, with the flash flooding in the slot canyons, these very narrow canyons. Some of them you can actually stretch your arms across and touch either side. And you're going to descend from the top into this canyon and then walk. And one in particular, it's only 1,200 feet long, but if it's pouring rain to the north, then all of that water is going to come streaming down the walls of the canyons to the north of you through the slot canyon, carrying all the debris it picks up, right with it. And it's going to rush in there in seconds. And that's
Mm.
going to be the end of you. So paying attention to the daily weather report is critically important. And in the one very famous case in Zion, 7 people, the Valencia Canyoneers, unfortunately did not. It was their first ever canyoneering
Mm.
outing, and they had taken a class in the morning, but that really wasn't enough. And they did not know that the water was coming, and they all drowned. So, you know,
Yeah, the one I was referring to is another one, I think it was like 1998. I took a little note here with the Algan, Ramsey Algan. That was a whole other one too, right? Or is that's not the same one?
no,
That was a whole other one.
that's
Okay.
another one.
It
Yeah,
happens a lot.
yeah,
You
it
wouldn't.
does. The Virgin River comes through this area called the Narrows, which I have hiked up that river. It's stunningly gorgeous. Oh my God. Everyone should do it, except they shouldn't. You
Mm.
know, you really have to be very aware of what the weather's going to be for exactly this reason. And at least in the Narrows, you can climb the canyon walls, but you may be trapped up there for days while you wait for the water to recede. And, before you hike the Narrows, you of course sign the register and you let rangers know where you're going to be so they know to look for you. One of the
Take the right
deadliest things.
precautions then, like
Right.
don't just go out there, make sure people know where to find you. Yeah, I mean, seems pretty
It,
obvious, but
it does, but it's amazing how many people think that, oh, the lure of solitude. You know what? That's not wise. Going off into the back country or the wilderness without telling anybody where you're going, that's a bad idea. So, if you're stuck in the Narrows, somebody will eventually come to find you, but you need to carry all these things we call the 10 essentials. You need to have extra food. You need to have a space blanket to keep warm. You need dry clothes. All of these things that you should be carrying if you're doing a hike like this. So that became my goal, not to just talk blood and gore, but to make it clear to people how these accidents happen, that they're not always because somebody did something stupid. They're often because somebody was just uninformed or they took on
yeah.
more than they could
Well,
handle.
it's another reason why now you are making such an impact because some guy might just happen to pick up your book and that could save his life.
Exactly,
So,
exactly. And that's what I'm hoping, that we can really make a difference with something like this. So, yeah, I have done 7 of them. Rocky Mountain is a scary place, Rocky Mountain National Park, there's one
mm,
peak there, Long's Peak, that is what they call a 14er. It's over 14,000 feet.
wow.
And when I wrote the book, 75 people had died on this mountain over the course of 100 years. So it's not really that many, but the year I wrote it, 3 people died on the mountain in 3 separate incidents. So it's increasing because more people go.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that makes sense. You know, more and more people go, the more people that show up. You know, our conversation actually reminds me a lot. I had a client who I helped angel write their book. We call it angel writing here at Authors on Mission. He talked a lot about his own experiences, you know, sort of with snowboarding, right? And so we talked a lot about how, you know, avalanche deaths and mountain tragedies happen very similarly because, you know, it becomes a more popular place to visit. You know, people plan their trips ahead of time, which is something you mentioned in your book too. They don't want to cancel it. And
Mhm.
then, you know, what do you know? You have more tourists going, more chance of avalanches, and you know, more people naturally causing it to happen because there's more weight on the mountain. So, yeah, I mean, it goes to show how one, your book can serve as a warning, and two, just like as a educational kind of cautionary thing to help them out. So,
Exactly, exactly. I knew right from the beginning that the first people who would pick up these books are the people who have lost someone, the families. So I never make fun of anybody. People think they're picking these up and it's going to be the Darwin Awards, or the Ig Nobel Awards that, people who
oh, no,
just,
you can't
yeah,
approach it like that. No.
no, absolutely not. Because nobody goes, well, with the exception of a few suicides, nobody goes into a national park with the plan of dying. Everyone thinks they're coming home. So, so that was my main concern, was not to make fun of anybody, but to help people think this could be me. This could just as easily have been
Yeah.
me. And I've had a couple of times where it really could have been me.
Oh, really?
Oh, sure.
Randy, do you have an experience like that? A
We
near-death experience?
we did a hike in Big Bend National Park to go find a little bird called the Colima warbler. And there's a very specific hike that you take to see this. But we did everything wrong. For everything we knew not to do, we did it all. We did all of it wrong. We didn't take the right things with us. It was 104 degrees. It was a 1,400-foot elevation change. We should have left before dawn. We left at 11 o'clock in the morning. It was the hottest part of the day. We ran out of water halfway up and we kept going. And that was just the stupidest thing we could have done. We had salty and sweet snacks with us that we should have eaten, and we didn't because we didn't feel hungry. Because when you're hiking like that, you don't feel hungry. And the more dehydrated you get, the less you feel like eating. So we made every possible mistake. And on the way back down, we were out there for 8 hours and never should have been. And we did see the bird, by the way. But on the
You
way
okay?
back
By the
down,
way, we actually did see what we wanted to see, but
yeah,
everything
but it
else kind of
wasn't
overshadowed that.
right. It wasn't worth it. It absolutely was not. And there was a point where I thought for the first time, oh my God, I could die out here. And we managed to stagger back and, we got to the little store at the top of the Chisos Mountains there and in the park and, bought all the Gatorade we could carry. But it took us a good 2 days before we felt normal again. And I just thought, nope, that's it for me in desert hiking. This is just, not doing it like this again. So yeah, there are lots of ways. There, as Seth MacFarlane said, there's a million ways to die in the West. So
Okay,
that
okay.
could have been one of
Not
them.
the quote I would have thought you would reference
Mm.
during this podcast. That's funny though. Remind me again, which desert again were you in?
That was the Chisos Desert. That was in Big Bend National Park.
Big Ben. Okay, got it. I was in Dubai this past summer, and I know how like hot and sweltering that was when we were near that desert. So I could only imagine. And I mean, we were perfectly fine with water and air conditioning, and
Mhm.
my gosh, like good for you. That's crazy. Yeah, and I mean, to all of our listeners right now, I mean, I don't know if you're as captivated by Randy as I am, but she has just so many stories like this, and I can only imagine within your books, you probably weave in stories just like this. I mean, maybe not in the Birding Guide because it's more factual, but I mean, do you kind of weave them into other books perhaps? Or
Yes,
okay.
actually, the book I'm working on now,
Oh,
which
here we go.
right there you
Listeners,
go. It's
before we got on this podcast today, Randy hinted, she said, I have a new project. And I said, wait. So here we go. Here's the moment. Do a drum roll. What is the new project?
It's called The Bear at the Bird Feeder, and it's about living with urban wildlife. That, when you come down to it, urban sprawl, suburban sprawl, everything has moved out farther and farther into areas that used to be wilderness, but the animals have not left. And it's not that they're moving into cities, it's that we're moving into their territory, and we have to be good neighbors. So today I was writing about skunks, for example. Skunks are actually, we all fear that skunks are going to spray on us, but, the chances of that are really pretty slim, unless you like trip over one, and then pretty much she's going to do that. But
Or unless you're my husky who just felt like going and saying hi and attacking.
well, yeah, because the dogs don't get it. They don't
No, they don't know until it's too
signs.
late.
Yeah, they really don't. And yeah,
But
at that,
I get what you mean, though.
yeah, the
Like,
skunk's
yeah.
going to feel threatened. It's going to spray. But skunks also eat tons of grubs and rodents and grasshoppers and crickets and all kinds of things that eat your plants. So if you have a skunk hanging out on your property, it's going to eat all the stuff that's ruining your garden. And that's not a bad thing. So we really can be good neighbors with these animals if we figure out how to maintain our distance and understand that they are wild animals and not pets, and they can be part of our world. So this is a book about everything from mountain lions and moose to squirrels. And, being a birder, we all know what squirrels do in our backyards. They eat every speck of bird food we put out. So, how do we deal with that? These are the kinds of things that I'm hoping will create a more tolerant relationship between us and the animals. Lots of people just love seeing wild animals in their backyards. Wouldn't it
Yeah.
be fun to have a bobcat, that visited once in a while? Many of us have deer, or we have groundhogs that live under a shed in our neighborhood. Lots of things like that, that if we learn what we need to do to create that tolerant relationship, then it can be fascinating and a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know for a fact I used to have a little squirrel coming up to my balcony every now and then. We'd give him like some nuts. I'm sure that's probably something you'd advise against doing,
Right.
but
Right.
it was always sweet to like, oh, there he is again. He's waiting right there for us at the window with his little paws against the glass. So I get it. Like it would be really sweet if we were able to be more accommodating to wildlife. Is there a certain tip that perhaps, maybe stands out more than others? Well, maybe you don't want to share it yet because it's not out on the shelves
Oh,
yet.
no, there's some of this will surprise nobody. Lock up your trash. If you truly do not want animals in your backyard, the number one thing to do is put your trash away, because an
Mhm.
awful lot of these animals are omnivores. They're going to eat whatever they can find. And the thing is, okay, so they eat things that are actually edible in your trash, most of which are not good for them. But they don't know what packaging is. So they're going to eat the paper and the foil and the plastic, and that can get, stuck in their digestive systems, and it can kill them. So you really don't want to allow a raccoon to be rustling around in your trash. You want to put that away
Yeah.
in your garage, and you want to make sure there are no holes in your garage, because the raccoon can smell it and can still, will be looking for a way to get in there. So
Understood.
yeah,
Basic and
that's
easy, just like the tips of going to national parks. But I mean, I don't know if mine is completely shut all the way. Right now, I have a lid on it. Is it completely latched? I don't know. I mean, I'll go check after this.
right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just so much of this is common sense, but putting
yeah.
it all in one book in one place, maybe it'll make a difference.
Good. Has it been challenging to collect all of this information like that? I mean, it can go in so many different directions, I'm sure.
Well, the harder thing is there is so much information on a topic like this. The harder
Exactly.
thing
That's where.
is narrowing it down and then finding people who will talk to me. Oddly enough, you'd think that anyone would talk to you about these things. I mean, it's such, it's such a user-friendly kind of topic, but I actually have had trouble getting naturalists and researchers to talk to me about some animals in particular, wild turkeys. Nobody wants to talk to me about wild turkeys, and I haven't figured out why yet.
Maybe there's a conspiracy. They know something we don't.
Maybe they think I'm going to tell them, that hunting is bad. Hunting is not bad. Hunting is honestly a good thing because we've removed so many predators from our environment that there's nothing to eat the turkeys and keep them in check. So now we have all these turkeys. So hunting is a good thing. It helps to reduce those numbers in a regulated way. But
when they assume that you're going to go the opposite direction when they hear that you're writing a book about wildlife, so maybe that's why they're keeping the doors closed.
Exactly.
That is actually a very valuable tip we can talk to our listeners about, because they too are probably trying to write their books and they're having trouble finding credible sources to interview. At Authors on Mission, we offer a lot of services, with our angel writers and, our team. We sometimes are able to put you in connection with people like experts in the industry and, offer people who can give you a little quote to put in there or to validate whatever you're saying. And that adds to your authenticity and your credibility. So, I mean, what kind of strategies did you use when somebody said no? Like, they would not talk to you about, one animal. What did you do? How did you find your way around them?
Well, I end up going to newspaper reports. One of the wonderful things now is that just about every newspaper has its entire archive online, either in something like newspapers.com or newspaperarchive.com through Ancestry, or in their own, like the Boston Globe keeps it all right in their own website. So if necessary, I can go and, track a story like for the wild turkeys in particular. There's a colony of wild turkeys living in Staten Island, if you can imagine this. Thousands of turkeys that just walk the streets and the sidewalks, and they defecate all over everything, and they annoy people, and turkeys are pretty bold, so they come up to people, and this freaks a lot of people out. Well, so the logical thing seemed to be, either relocate them to farms or bring in some kind of hunting organization to trap them and take them into the wilderness and have them essentially executed. And then feed the homeless with turkey. It seemed like a logical thing. Well, this is the thing nobody would talk to me about. Like, why aren't you why haven't you found a solution to this? This seems like a logical thing. Well, I found out by looking through news reports that they tried to do this and that they didn't tell the community that's what they were doing. They just went ahead and brought in a crew and started trapping the turkeys right out in public. And people went nuts. There were
thinking they were just being like killed for no reason or something.
Right. So all of a sudden, all these people who love the turkeys came out with signs and held protests and, sit-ins and, fought this so hard that they had to back off. I mean, they did get a couple hundred turkeys, but, in the end, they had to leave them alone. And the turkeys continue to propagate, and there are more and more turkeys in Staten Island. So that's the story that no one wanted to tell me.
Interesting. Well, you were able to find out on your own, so it really wasn't much of a secret. But I guess at the end of the day, it's about transparency. I mean, if they just put up little flyers saying, like, these turkeys got to go, this is why, then people would probably be more understanding. This is where we're putting them. They're going to be okay, or for the most part. But yeah, wow. What's amazing about that book? Well, this upcoming book, which you said you're going to be finishing within the next week, you said?
Yeah, I'm really coming into the home stretch. It comes out next September.
A year from now, then?
Almost a year. Yeah, it takes a while. This is a thing that you don't realize, especially if you're self-publishing, that if you go with a traditional publisher, it can take 9 months to a year before your finished book actually ends up on shelves.
Randy, that's shocking. We do it within 6 months here at Authors on Mission for most of the time. We knock out with the
Right.
angel writers, like, I finish a book within like a month, 2 months, and our marketing team, our publishing team get right on it right after. I mean, maybe it's part of the system and everything, but wow, I have to wait until September?
Yeah, that's what happens.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's there are things about the publishing industry that are still very, very rooted in the 1950s and 60s. And the long lead time is one of them. That, yes, of course you can produce books faster. I used to wrote for a while for a publisher called Callisto Media that you may have known. They were sold to Simon and Schuster, but they turned out a book in 6 weeks. I had 3 weeks
Mm.
to write it, and then they had
Right, you
in
did
three
mention you were
weeks.
on that
Yeah.
deadline.
hmm And that was definitely the wave of the future. And people who self-publish on in electronic format can get it out, 2 weeks after they finish it. So but traditional publishing still kind of limps as far as that goes.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, we definitely have services here that, print books out like much faster. So maybe next time we can help you out. But no, I know there's many different methods, and I'm sure a publisher also has very good reasons for that, to make sure it's like top notch. So,
Right.
every
Right.
avenue is different. Every avenue works for somebody else. If you're listening right now and you don't want to wait till September, I mean, maybe finding other options better. But also, if you're someone like Randy who really put a lot of like heart and soul into this, and she wants to make sure that it's done perfect, we can do that. Other
Mhm.
people can probably offer similar services too. So it's
Right.
all up
Right.
to whatever works. But yeah, I guess like one other thing I wanted to mention about your book that I think is amazing that a lot of our listeners probably relate to is the relatability of it. Like as you were talking about just like all these different wildlife and everything, I was like, wait a minute, I actually have like my own experience with wildlife, like coming into my own backyard or even like my elementary school and stuff like that, where like anybody can relate to it. So I feel like it's actually going to be a very big hit because everyone has their own story that they want to share. They pick up the book and they'll end up telling their friend about it and also relating it to a story they also had.
Right. That's what I'm hoping, that that would be great. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, as we're sort of winding down to the end of our podcast here, Randy, I'm wondering, what is one piece of advice we can leave our listeners with today? Something that, they're inspired by your story like I am right now. What can you leave them with as we say goodbye today?
Boy, learn to market. If you don't market your book, nobody's going to know it's there. That to me is the critical thing. With most publishers, with the possible exception of the big five, most of that marketing skill is going to have to come from you. Learn to do it, find ways to do it. You don't have to spend a lot of money. I've been doing what I've been calling a virtual book tour with a lot of podcasts this year, and it's working. I can see those numbers going way up on Amazon. So, there are lots of ways to do this, but make that part of your plan.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote a book about this recently too. You need to plan for what you're going to do with your book once you're done with the book. So it's very important to, make a schedule for how you're going to release, content promoting the book before and after the publication. Like you mentioned, getting onto podcasts. Our podcast is amazing for that because everybody likes to read here on Authors on Mission. Everyone likes to write. But if you don't have the time to do that and to make your own content and promote, or if perhaps it's just like not in your realm,
Right.
we are here to help at Authors because we also offer amazing marketing services too. We kind of have just like the whole package deal too. So to any of our listeners right now who just heard that too, you can do it yourself or you can hire a team and, save yourself the headache a bit too. So either way you do it though, it's very important to make sure it happens. Otherwise your book's going to sit on a shelf and you'll have it, but who else will besides you? So
That's
it's
exactly it.
important. Yeah, I agree. Um, so yeah, I mean, honestly, thank you, Randy. I love this conversation today. One more thing before we say goodbye today. I actually really have one question that I promised my boyfriend I would ask you.
Sure.
Have you ever done a big year?
Oh,
Because that
Um,
movie came out with Owen
yeah.
Wilson, and when he heard you were a bird watcher, he was like, "You have to find out about that." I'm sorry, really quick to all of our listeners too.
Oh,
There's this
no.
movie that came out a couple of years back about the
Right.
big year where people go around and they try to bird watch in all the different states, and within a year, Randy, have you done that?
I have not because
You have
it's so
not.
freakishly expensive.
Oh,
Running back and forth across the country after rarities? No, I have not done that. If ever win the lottery, that's the number one thing I want to do, but not so far.
well, once this new book comes out, you'll be able to, because you'll get all the world.
Right, from your
um,
mouth to God's ears, as my grandmother used to say.
I had to find out, so that's thank you for that.
Understood.
So again, everybody, check out Randy, all of her books. Where can they find you? Where they would like to find more information about you? Have a website. Share it with
Yep.
our listeners.
Yep. My website is Minetor.com. That's Minetor. I'm also, I have a Facebook page that I keep updated, and you can subscribe to my newsletter, The Labyrinth, because my name is Minotaur. And, uh, and I'm also on Threads pretty much every day. So lots of places.
Awesome, awesome. So you heard it from her, everybody. Check out her social media, and all of her books are on Amazon too, anywhere you could find them. Over 50 grand versions of different books, right? So they're all over the place. Check it out, learn more about her, and if you're inspired by Randy's story today, you know, don't stop, don't wait. Find your own path to making your dreams happen. Start writing. You never know how much you'll learn just by starting to research a topic like we talked about today. You never know where it's going to lead you. You could be traveling the country like Randy, or, to all of our other listeners, like I've traveled around the world too, just doing different projects as well. So follow your path, do what it takes you, and all in all, follow your dream. So yeah, Brandy, thank you for being a part of another episode of Authors on Mission podcast.
Oh,
And to all of our
thank you,
listeners,
Danielle.
thank you.
This was a delight. Thank you.
It's truly a delight. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer of Authors on Mission. And until next time, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.